That's a progress.
Yeah. You may notice that what is occupying the Israeli government now is the question of Iran and the question of Syria. Even this morning you heard of the American Minister of Defense coming here and offering a big arms deal in order to make us more efficient against Iran. So first of all, before I discuss the whole situation in Israel, you cannot separate this from what is happening in the whole region. You cannot separate it from Iran and from Syria and from anywhere. And therefore I want first to give a brief survey of what is happening in the region. The Americans, well, let me say it like this. The American foreign policy has always been one of dominating other countries. But the nature of this policy has changed. Before 1973, the policy was to roll back the red carpet. And it was the time that they overthrew the regime of Lumumba, they overthrew the regime of Sukarno, they bombed to...
Castro also was target for them?
Yeah. But this was until 1973. In 1973, something important happened. There was the Yom Kippur War, and after the war, because many countries had been offering aid to Israel, Saudi Arabia declared an embargo on all countries which had given aid to Israel. And the result was that the price of oil went up. Then there was after that there was the war of Iran and Iraq. Price of oil went up. For the last 20 years or so, the price of oil has been anything between $80 and $130 a barrel. In the 20 years after the Second World War, until 1973, the price of oil never went above $20 a barrel. It's suddenly a jump. Now, why is this important? It's important because the profits of the oil companies just went up through the ceiling. And the oil companies became the dominant factor in American foreign policy. I looked at statistics, official statistics, of the 5 biggest United States oil companies, I think in the year 2010 or something like that, to see how much profits they made during 1 year. They made a profit of $150 billion. Okay, what's $150 billion? to know whether this is important, you must ask, what did the other firms do? What did IBM do? What were the profits of Microsoft? What were the profits of General Motors and so on? None of these firms had profits more than $20 billion a year. Usually it was between 12 and 20 billion dollars. The oil companies made a profit of $150 billion. And if you take into account the oil companies in Europe, in Italy, in France, and so on, you find that the whole financial structure of the leading industries was now in the matter of oil. And this resulted in a change in the foreign policy of the United States. You had that what dictated foreign policy was not so much the army, still important, but mainly the oil companies, because they dominated, and the history of the Middle East after 73 is the history of the oil companies and the wars that they waged. Okay? The first big war was Afghanistan. Now, Afghanistan was connected with very big oil wells in Central Asia, in Turkmenistan, in Kazakhstan, and so on. And the Americans had many of the big concessions there in these countries. And the problem was how to get the oil out, how to get the gas out. Now, part of the oil went out through into Russia and out through the Black Sea. But the Black Sea was blocked. The Dardanelles, you have every 10 minutes a boat goes through. If a boat will sink, then it's blocked. You cannot increase it. And the American policy was to get the oil out, the gas out, towards the south, which means through Afghanistan. It could have gone through Iran, but Iran wasn't. These are the two possibilities: either get it out through Iran or through Afghanistan. The trouble was that you couldn't rely on the Taliban to guard the pipelines of the Americans. And so you had the war in Afghanistan, and I've seen estimates that the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq cost the Americans $1.5 trillion. But it didn't work. They couldn't subdue the Taliban. They couldn't guarantee that the oil would be protected, the gas lines and pipelines. And okay, that was Afghanistan. Then there was the question of Iraq. Iraq has, I think, the second or third most reserves of oil in the world. And the Americans weren't really there. The occupation of Iraq, the Americans did several things. First of all, they divided the state into autonomous regions. The Kurdistan in the north, where most of the oil was found, got autonomy, and autonomous Kurdistan started to give concessions to the Americans to produce oil. This was fine, except they couldn't get the oil out. To get it out, you either went to the north, which means Turkish Kurdistan.
Yeah.
And the Turks are not prepared to have any deals with Iraqi Kurdistan because they're afraid. The other alternative was to go to the south, through Iraq to the Gulf of the Persian Gulf, and then out to the world. But the Iraqi government refused, because they said the oil from Kurdistan belongs to them, and they should get the royalties. The Americans were giving royalties to the Kurds, and so they couldn't get it out. The other alternative was Syria. Syria, and there was the problem. There was the problem. But I'll come back to this, to Syria. Then what else was there? Of course, Iran itself. Now, Iran was extremely important. Iran had, I think, the second biggest reserves of oil and gas in the world. And this was especially after they discovered a huge gas field in the Persian Gulf between Iran and Qatar. This was the biggest gas field in the world. The biggest gas field in the world. And the question was, half belonged to Qatar, half belonged to Iran. Who would sell it? Who would market it? This was the problem. Iran made a deal with Pakistan to build a pipeline through Iran and into Pakistan. And the Americans were crazy. They said, you take our gas from Central Asia, but of course there was no pipelines. And Hillary Clinton went to Pakistan to say that if they didn't stop this deal with Iran, there would be sanctions.
Against Pakistan?
Against Pakistan. And the Pakistan foreign minister says, go home. She sent Hillary Clinton away. But this is only part of it. And at present, the pipeline through Iran to the Pakistani border has been constructed. China has offered a loan of $500 million to build the section into Pakistan. Okay, that's how the situation
But Iran doesn't mean that Iran, they are on the sea. Iran can, they can send to the world through the ships.
She can, but it's much cheaper if you can send it by pipe. Because to send it by ship, you have to have an installation to liquefy it. And then the liquefied gas you put into tankers. And it's very expensive. If you can send it straight by pipes, it's cheap. Yeah.
But the pipes have to be protected?
The pipe through Iran, there's no problem. The pipe through Pakistan, there's also no problem. Pakistan is protecting it, there's no problem. And the question was with India now to have the continuation. The Americans are not having a good time with all this problem of gas. However, the Americans and the Qataris wanted to send the Qatari gas north to Europe. And the route was through Saudi Arabia, through Jordan, through Syria, Turkey, Europe. And this was a fantastic market with one problem, Syria.
Why?
Because Syria didn't, I haven't told you the whole story. 2 years ago, the Washington Post, I think, published a deal which had been signed by Iran, Iraq, and Syria to build up a gas pipeline from the rich fields in the Persian Gulf through Iraq, through Syria to the Mediterranean. This was signed, and then at the time they were negotiating, you suddenly had the Americans becoming interested in the Arab Spring in Syria and beginning to send mercenaries, murderers, to try to overthrow the regime. Secondly, Syria, I told you, there was a problem that Syria, because she was in good relations with Iraq, did not accept to send gas or oil from Kurdistan through Syria. And so Syria was the bottleneck. Syria was the bottleneck, and if you understand the whole of the situation in the Middle East, you understand why this Qatar has been so furious. She's demanded in the United Security Council to intervene and overthrow this brutal Assad instead of having a democratic regime like in Qatar. Assad. Sorry, I've lost my thread a moment.
I think Qatar is supporting...
Saudi Arabia are giving all the money for the uprising.
Yes.
The arms are coming from Britain, from France, from Croatia, where a lot of the NATO weapons are stored. They are all coming in. So this is NATO coming in, the Saudi and the Americans are behind. They are not interfering. They do not want problems with Russia. But this is the whole story. What did I want to say about Syria?
Die Gasleitung ans Mittelmeer war doch gerade das Thema.
Ja, das ist mit der Pipeline.
Anyway, okay, so let me leave this now. So you can understand then that the policy, the American policy is to overthrow, I now remember what I wanted to say. The Americans organized a European boycott of Iranian oil and gas.
Yes.
She organized this because she wasn't certain that whether they could overthrow Assad, and they wanted to block the European market to the Iranian gas. How did they do it? How did they organize the boycott? They said that these people are developing nuclear weapons, and Israel, for instance, cannot restrain herself. She's going to attack and is going to be war. And in this atmosphere, the European states agreed to boycott. The Americans don't want more than a boycott. The Americans, in my view, for them, this is the most important factor. There was recently negotiation, I think, in Kyrgyzstan on the question of Iran nuclear weapons. Do you remember? It was Iran took part, the European countries took part, and the Americans took part. And Iran was prepared to make many concessions. And I saw a statement in our newspaper. The Americans said to the Iranians, if you will concede what we are demanding on all issues, we'll relax the boycott, but the boycott of oil and gas from Europe
Will remain.
This will remain. So this was important. The boycott was important because it prevented Iranian gas from competing with Qatar gas to go to Europe.